And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Wednesday morning flying weather graphic here showing IFR with the Bering Sea storm here extending up and almost to the southwest coast, but is covering Nunivak Island and the Pribilofs, extending back down to Adak and Atka. More IFR along the Alaska Peninsula. A strip of IFR due to the blowing snow conditions along the Arctic coast. And IFR, Kodiak Island into the Barrens there and Kamishak Bay area. Marginal VFR for the southern and central southeast coast. IFR now shifts farther east into the Gulf of Alaska and into Prince William Sound tomorrow, covering a good portion of the Kenai Peninsula into about the Chugach Mountains, possibly, and marginal VFR into the Manuska Valley. IFR along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range. VFR holds over the interior. IFR holds over the Arctic coast. And IFR here over the central Bering Sea down to Adak and Atka, eastern Aleutians to about False Pass northward to the Pribilofs. And then for the Thursday morning time frame, we've got IFR here again along the Arctic coast. A smaller area of IFR now over the central Bering Sea, but still covering the Pribilof Islands. Marginal VFR for the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, northward to St. Lawrence Island. And in across Togiak Bay here into the southwest mountains. Kodiak, marginal VFR, IFR here, northern Cook Inlet, eastward into the northern Panhandle. And then for the afternoon hours, the IFR becomes VFR for northern Cook Inlet in the southern Susitna Valley, marginal VFR for the North Gulf Coast, Copper River Basin, all of the southeast coast, north of the Alaska Range and out toward the Yukon Delta, VFR there, extending northward again across the Brooks Range, becoming IFR along the Arctic coast. And we've got marginal VFR over all of the Aleutians and much of the Bering Sea. Passes for the day tomorrow. Wednesday is calling for VFR. VFR for Anatuvik and Adigan, and for Lake Clark and Merrill, IFR for those passes, rainy marginal VFR, and windy VFR. Moving over to Isabel, VFR as well, and Mentasta also VFR with, Portage, or Tanita, marginal VFR, Portage, IFR, especially on the eastern entrance here, and for Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels, 2 to 4,000 feet there across the southeast coast. Otherwise off the chart here out west. And for the icing, quite an area, a couple of big areas here of considerable moderate rime icing. Pribilof Islands down into the western Alaska Peninsula, Unalaska Island. Another batch out here, Adak and Atka, extending northwestward there. And then some possible considerable moderate icing for the Susitna Valley into northern Cook Inlet. And bigger area here from the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, covering all of the Panhandle. And the 33,000 foot wind flow chart showing south flow here across the Gulf of Alaska into south central, about 70 to 75 knots, turning easterly at 75 knots there from the southwest coast over the northern Bering Sea areas. And from there going to 9,000 feet. Again, the big low here lifting northward just north of the Aleutians by tomorrow. And southeast winds 50 to 55 knots there. Southeast also 55 knots with another developing system here in the Gulf, and even a little bit stronger there for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Otherwise south to southwest about 40 knots into the Panhandle. Easterly winds 60 knots across the north slope and moving to 3,000 feet. Strongest winds now here just south of the Brooks Range, 50 knots there over the southeastern Brooks Range, and up to 75 knots, Kobuk Valley and along the northwest coast here, and probably about 50 to 55 knots continue there for the Arctic coast. 55 to 60 knot winds out of the east and southeast here over the Nunivak Island area and down along the southwest coast. And 55 knot winds out of the south-southeast along the North Gulf Coast and a narrow band extending down along the Panhandle to about 45 knots down toward Dixon Entrance. Out to the west, northwest winds on the backside of this low, 50 to 55 knots. Turbulence-wise, a lot of moderate turbulence in the forecast for the Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula up into Bristol Bay in the southwest interior, big area up here over the northern interior in the Brooks Range, and also for St. Lawrence Island, moderate turbulence, northern Cook Inlet, Susitna, Manuska Valley, North Gulf Coast, and most of the Panhandle.